Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Our research-backed videos are engaging, easy to follow, and they help ease the daily challenges like agitation and anxiety so that you can focus on connection and joy. Available by subscription on mobile and TV apps, Zinnia makes every day a little bit easier. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
Welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast, a podcast about the popes of Rome and Christian Church. Prepare yourself to step behind the ropes and leave the official tour of the story of the popes and Christianity. I am your host, Steve Guerra, and I thank you for joining me on this journey. Hey everybody, before we get started today, I would like to send out two very special thank yous. One to our latest Patreon supporter at patreon.com/the history of the papacy is Court. I got to know Court in an interesting way. He actually sent in a critique of a last episode of the audio not sounding to the normal standard. And I said, well, maybe I can send you a couple of snippets of future episodes so that you could see if they're maybe sounding more normal. And he did. And it was very helpful. And then I later found out that we're from the same town. And so he became a test listener of the show. And then he became a Rome supporter at patreon.com, History of the Papacy. So now Court will be officially known as Court the Great. So thank you so much, Court, for all of your help with the podcast and for becoming a supporter on Patreon. I would also like to send out a special thank you to Larry, who decided to become a patron supporter at Antioch. So thank you very much, Court the Great and Larry. Now for today, we have a really special episode of the History of the Papacy, and this episode was suggested and inspired by a longtime listener, Zach. He emailed me to see if I had seen that the Canadian sports betting site Sports in Action has a section open for betting on the name of the next pope. Zach thought that was hilarious, and so I checked them out, and I found it hilarious too. I am fascinated by the rise of sports betting. On my other podcast, Beyond the Big Screen, my co-host and I, Mustache Chris, did a deep dive into the Chicago White Sox scandal of 1919. Part of what we talked about is modern sports gambling. I have mixed feelings about the proliferation of sports gambling. It's fascinating to be able to place a wager on almost any aspect of any game. But to me, the leagues and the players are opening themselves up to the potential for enormous problems. Problems that would make the 1919 World Series scandal look like basically Little League. Now, I have more positive feelings about other types of gambling books. There are sites that are specifically designed to place wagers on political, cultural, and economic events. The things that people are able to place wager on is nearly infinite. I remember a few years ago, maybe when Obama ran for his second term, but don't quote me on that, when people started to place bets on who would win the presidential election. I thought it was madness, but ingenious madness. Using gambling as a prediction indicator makes a ton of sense. Firstly, people are putting their money where their mouth is. They aren't just pontificating like some talking head on TV. Millions of people are actually using the information they've gathered around in their own lives and applying it to a market. The betting markets operate as a type of crowdsourcing of information. The prediction markets like Polymarket were a lot more accurate than nearly any professional polling agency. I think that is due to the nature of how the data is collected. Most political polling institutions rely still on this to this very day on antiquated methods of gathering data. They are still calling people on their landlines. I am not what anyone would consider young, and I haven't had a landline as my primary phone in 20 years, but that is neither here nor there. I will just say prediction markets are really interesting to me, and I think that they will be something that could be revolutionary in the future. So back to Zach's idea of betting on the names of the next pope. The name of the next pope is of more pressing concern of late. As of the recording of this episode at the end of February 2025, Pope Francis is still alive, but he has been in the hospital since February 14th of 2025. I won't go into a retrospective of Pope Francis's papacy or background before his ring is hammered, so to speak. I will definitely go into the conclave, much like we did way back in the first few weeks of the launch of the history of the papacy as a podcast, when we did an entire series on the 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis. Let's leave that for another day and certainly not rush into it. Now, as of this recording, it seems that the Sports in Action has taken down its book for betting on the next papal name, but there are other sites that have similar odds making. The Sports Geek has a book open on the odds for the next papal name. Right now, Francis, presumably Francis II, has the best odds by quite a bit. None of the options at this point are a safe bet, but that will likely get more focused as we get closer and closer to the next conclave. How accurate anyone can get with the papal name is an interesting bet. The choice is ultimately up to the newly elected pope alone and nobody else. On the other hand, there is a generally fairly small pool of names popes pick from. Cardinal Bergoglio, the soon-to-be Francis, back in 2013, went in his own direction and picked a new name for his papal name, a name that had never been used before. Therefore, he is Pope Francis I. In the last 200 years, there were only 8 different names used by 15 popes, with Pius being the most common. Cardinal Albino Luciani innovated a new name upon his coronation to the papacy back in 1978. He combined the names of the 2 popes previous to him into John Paul. There was Pope John and then a Pope Paul, and he combined them up. After John Paul I's extremely short reign of 33 days, his successor, Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, picked up with a new idea and chose the name Pope John Paul II. Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
Since the year 1800, there have been 6 Piuses, 2 Leos, 2 Benedicts, 2 John Pauls, and one for each of Paul, Gregory, and Francis. I myself have a hard time coming up with a good rationale for picking the next papal name, putting my wager on it, so to speak. I lean towards either someone picking a new name altogether, although I can't imagine what that name would be. I think the odds could be good that if the cardinal is a staunch devotee of Pope Francis and aims to carry on his legacy, we could see a Francis II. The election is the big hitch of papal conclaves. Who will get elected, of course, is the hitch of all elections, but papal conclaves are unique. Conclaves are not popular elections, even though at one time popes were elected popularly. Now, popes are elected by a council of elders, the College of Cardinals. The College of Cardinals has a maximum age of 80 years old as a cardinal elector, so there is quite a turnaround on cardinal electors. Francis has been pope for about 13 years, but he has appointed nearly 80% of the cardinal electors. Does that mean a follower of Francis is guaranteed to be elected pope? That's a question for another day. Now, are you all ready to start placing bets on what the next pope's name will be, or maybe who the next pope will be? Maybe you should hold off for just a second if you are a Catholic, because your ability to participate in communion might be at stake. Pope Pius IV, way back in the 1500s, in a papal bull, forbade placing wagers on papal conclaves. Throughout the 1500s, other popes tried to place limits and bans on betting on papal conclaves as well, to varying effect. This was a part of a larger push by the papacy to ban or really limit gambling. One ban in particular was gambling on the sex of unborn babies. This was called the Maschio et Femina. Popes throughout the 1500s and into the early 1600s continued to crack down on illegal gambling on papal conclaves. Highly organized and public gambling on papal elections pretty much went away by then. You can see why the papacy and the apparatus of the Vatican would want to get rid of this institutionalized gambling on papal elections. These elections are supposed to be sacred, for crying out loud. Everything about them is that the Holy Spirit is at work in the conclave. The bunch of cardinals are supposed to be channeling the Holy Spirit to find the best man to run the church. How can they really tolerate the level of corruption, that highly organized gambling, and the possible influence on cardinals that could come of it? No organization can really long tolerate that level of potential corruption and really last very long. I keep going back to gambling in the 1919 White Sox scandals. Again, check out my episode Beyond the Big Screen if you're interested. Links in the description. The baseball commissioner came down so hard on the White Sox players and basically ground their careers and lives into the rich red dirt of the baseball infield because he didn't want there to be one speck of an iota of an idea to come across to the fans' minds that the sport of baseball in any way possible could be corrupted by gambling. The same thing happened to the famous Pete Rose in the 1980s. Pete Rose was maybe the best baseball player of all time, just like Shoeless Joe Jackson over a century ago. Both of these guys got banned to Kingdom Come because they put a serious negative mark on the game. Oh, how things have changed in the past few years. I was shocked, honestly shocked, to see one of the most popular sports betting sites as a massive sponsor of the National Football League and their Super Bowl. Sports betting has seeped into every aspect of professional sports, at least in the United States and in Canada. I can't speak to gambling in other countries because honestly, I'm not that interested in sports to begin with. Just some of the ancillary items around sports, like sports gambling. Gambling will almost certainly corrupt these sports organizations the way Pope Pius feared gambling would corrupt papal conclaves. half a millennium ago. With all that being said, I will be checking out the prediction markets during the next conclaves. As I've also said, as of the recording of this episode, Pope Francis is still alive, and I hope he recovers and we won't have to do a papal conclave for a long time to come. Depending on your point of view, that will be in the fate of the universe, fortune, or God's hands. And with that, I will see you on the next stop on our trip through the history of the Popes of Rome and Christian Church.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
The Historical Jesus Podcast is the sweeping saga of the life and times of Galilean Jesus of Nazareth, as well as the faith, religion, and church founded to honor and disseminate his acts and teachings. Join me, Mark Vinette, on this fascinating journey through time, exploring the many great works of Christian theology, literature, architecture, music, and art inspired by the words and deeds of Jesus Christ.